Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We all know the devastation that rain has caused across Oklahoma, and cropland is certainly no exception when it comes to damage. Today we begin with SUNUP's Dave Deacon getting perspective from our Extension Cropping System Specialist, Josh Lofton.
It goes without saying that water has been an issue with all crops this year. And Josh, here at the Perkins Research Station, you've planted soybeans and there has been a difference in planting date, but also plant height.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, we all know the floods and the recent weather have drastically affected our wheat crop, canola crops, and our summer crops. And for those folks around the state that were lucky enough to get the crop in before these rains, it's not been all sunshine past that. And we have an example of it right here to where we had the crop planted, the crop was actually emerged when we actually had floodwaters here. And basically what you're seeing is where you are in the field based on how you know, the height, the depressions. We're either seeing the soybeans are perfectly fine or they're dead.
Well, and we're in what could be classified as kind of a low spot in the field, but just a few feet that way, having no water, you know, flooding those seeds over there has helped.
Yeah, exactly right. So we are here in a low spot, and if you kind of want to get down through here, you see these soybeans that were up when the floods waters are here. We basically have dead soybean plants here. But you're exactly right. You get about 10 feet down the row here, where it's a high spot in the field, yeah. And we don't have anything dead, and it's a perfect stand. So a lot of things could happen. One, you could basically get a full termination of the plant like we have here. We also have in some of these kind of these smaller indentions to where we're delayed in maturity. So you even see just within 10 feet of each other, we have a trifoliate trying to work its way out here. We're still at cotyledon stage here. So we're now, that something that was planted the same day is now drastically different as far as maturity, and that could cause us a couple of really big things on down the line.
Are we seeing it in soybeans only? Are we seeing it in other summer crops?
See, the big thing is our broadleafs are a lot more sensitive. Right. And so when we have a broadleaf, it's like a soybean plant, probably even something like a cotton plant go underwater. Most of our broadleafs, we like to say they don't like wet feet. And right. So anytime it goes underwater, we start really getting antsy and really getting questionable. If our growers do have parts of the field that have flooded out and parts of it that are not, we can replant part of the field. So that's always an option. There's a lot of options here, but it is kind of this week when we'll start to know the true effects of those flooding. It's typically that 7 to 10 days after. So if growers get their boots out in the field by this weekend, get a good look at what's out there, they'll have a good indication of what's keepable and what's maybe replantable. The good thing about soybean, we often see our June planted as one of our best yield potentials because it kind of fits in with our rain patterns. Right. And so there's still time. Your yield potential is probably going to be a little depressed, but there's still time to get really adequate yields out of your soybean crop. We just have to kind of get a little bit of break in the moisture to be able to get tractors in the field.
As far as soil nutrition goes, is there going to be any changes with that in the lower spots versus the higher spots? Absolutely,
and it's a little more influenced by something like a cotton or a sorghum or a corn crop where nitrogen's a big component. With our soybean, we don't really want to, or we don't really have that influence of nitrogen, which is what the nutrient you typically think about in those floodwaters is our nitrogen. Now we can have a diminish of some of our other nutrients, but where you're really wanting to look at is your sorghums, your corns, and your cottons. That's where a great thing, I say it almost every time we're on SUNUP, that enriched strip is going to pay dividends this year of being able to see how much of that pre-plant nitrogen is still there and how much we need to readdress. The other thing you have to think of is even if your crop comes out, your yield potential could be a little depressed. So we don't maybe need as much nitrogen as we potentially could have walking into this year, but those enriched strips are a great thing to have out there to kind of guide decisions.
Okay, thank you very much. Josh Lofton, Cropping Systems Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Welcome to your weekly Mesonet weather report. I hate to sound like a broken record, but this week brought us about the same severe weather conditions as last week. More hail, more tornadoes, and more heavy rain to areas of the state that could least handle it. The 7-day rainfall map from 3 o'clock on May 29th shows heavy amounts in the northeast quadrant of the state again. The heaviest band of rain fell from Kingfisher with 7.6 inches all the way to Miami, which received 7.14 inches. The orange areas in between were generally in the 6-inch range. This is over the area of the state that has already experienced the worst flooding events. Soils continue to be wet over the entire state. This map from Wednesday shows one-day average bare soil fractional water index levels at 4 inches. Only the far southeastern counties were allowed to dry out just a little bit this week. Not surprisingly, these wet conditions have resulted in delayed planting for many Oklahoma summer crops. This chart from NASS shows the percent of crops planted for the week ending May 26th. All are behind the 5-year average by a significant amount. Grain sorghum is the furthest behind, with only a third of the acres planted that normally are by this time of year. Now here's Gary with some impressive May rainfall totals.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to talk about rainfall again, just like we did last week, the week before that, and even the week before that. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but as long as it keeps raining, that's what we're going to talk about. As you can see, we have a large strip from across the northwestern half of the state, rainfall from west central Oklahoma up through central into northeast Oklahoma of about 12 to 20 inches. Now we have ups and downs within that area, but about 12 to 20 inches as you travel from west central up into northeast Oklahoma. We do see other areas down in southern Oklahoma with close to 10 inches. The Panhandle itself from around 2 to as much as 7 inches. Now, poor little Kenton out there with 2.1 inches. So everybody's gotten a really good dose of rainfall. If we look at Kenton out there with just 2.1 inches, that looks a little bit paltry compared to the other totals. However, if we go to the departure from normal map for May, we do see that that is still above normal for the month. So even Kenton with just a little over 2 inches is still above normal. So everybody's gotten a really good drink of water. Most people, though, have gotten way too much water. Now, unfortunately, the medium range outlook, this is for next week. As we get into the latter parts of next week, we do see greatly increased odds of above normal precipitation across the southern plains, once again, centered right over Oklahoma. So that would definitely not be good news for the waterlogged parts of our state. Some people that might need a little bit of rainfall, that would be good, but for most people that would be somewhat disastrous. So the good news is, I never thought I'd be saying this, is that summer's just around the corner and maybe we'll dry out. I'm not talking about drought, I'm just talking about maybe not 5-6 inches of rain every day. So that would certainly be wonderful. Let's keep our eye out for that. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
With all the flooding across the state, there's a lot of issues that people need to be concerned with. And Sergio, one of those issues is with septic systems.
Yeah, septic systems. Actually, 40% of houses in the state have septic systems. So that's a quite substantial percentage of fraction of houses in the state. And of septic systems in the state, 90% of that are two systems. One is the conventional systems. That's the gravel septic tank. You have a gravel and pipe, dispersal area. And the other one is the aerobic treatment system. So those are the two main ones. And these two types of systems are adversely affected by severe weather events that bring floods and, of course, power interruptions.
So let's just talk about the conventional septic system and what are some of the issues that flooding, causes with those.
Okay, so a conventional system has a septic tank and a lateral line. So if you have a septic tanks, there's going to be lids exposed at the surface. And if the lids are not watertight, there's always going to be that possibility that water is going to seep into your tank. And now, if your tank has flood water, well, water from your house is not going to go anywhere, all right? So it's going to back to the house. And if there's too much water in your septic tank, there's even that possibility that the water in the tank itself is going to backflow to your house. So that itself is a very, very, very bad situation because, you know, you have contaminants and pollutants and hazardous substances in your sewer.
Well, that sounds really worrisome, but there are some measures that people can take to, you know, if their backyard is flooded, to, you know, there are measures that they can take to prevent some of those issues, right?
Yeah, to prevent those issues, first of all, whenever your backyard is not flooded, where your septic tank is, the first thing you got to do is minimize water use. You never know how long the flood is going to last, so minimize water use. The second is that if you have a basement, better plug those drains in your basement, just to be sure.
So let's move to the aerobic systems, and with those, what are some of the issues that flooding causes with those types of systems?
All right, the aerobic treatment system, again, this is a very, very popular system in the state. It runs with electricity. It has a pump that basically controls the dispersal of water to your backyard, and there's also an aerator that supplies air, supplies atmospheric air to your tank to enhance treatment. All those runs in electricity. So if that control box that has those electrical components is in the risk of being flooded, you better turn off your pump, your system, because, you know, water and electricity doesn't really agree with each other. Whenever there's a flood, whenever there's flooding that affects your electrical components, your septic tanks, it's prudent to call somebody, a professional. It's not good to open the tanks yourself because there could be harmful fumes and of course harmful microorganisms, pathogenic microorganisms. And for those electrical components, if they are flooded, rusting and short-circuiting, that's not a good deal for you to do by yourself. Call a professional to do it for you.
All right, thanks, Sergio.
Yeah.
If you would like some more information on conventional and aerobic systems, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, is here now. Kim, normally we'd be diving right into harvest. Instead, a lot of producers dealing with flood damage and waterlogged fields.
Well, right now I think the estimate is in the market around 15% loss in yields or overall production. The unknown is the quality of the crop that we'll harvest. If it continues to rain, what we're worried most about is sprout damage for the kernels in the wheat. Now, sprout damage, it's not like a fungus, but it just reduces the milling quality of the wheat. And once it sprouts, then it can't go into the flour milling process or the flour market.
As we wait, though, there is some good news in terms of prices that we can share. Get us up to speed.
Yeah, we've seen some good price increases since May the 12th, we've had a 66-cent increase in wheat prices. You know, they went from $3.72 for harvest delivered wheat to $4.38. You look at corn and sorghum, a 64-cent price increase there. They're at $3.96 and $3.86 now, with sorghum a 10-cent discount to corn. Soybeans, a 71-cent price increase there. They're up to almost $8.
Do you think the prices will hold, or we just kind of have to wait and see?
Well, at any given time, there's a 50% chance prices are going to go up and 50% that they're going down, so they're all at risk. The biggest bad news is the dollar index is up to 98. That's extremely high. We're right now priced out of the export market with wheat, and so our prices either have to go back down or the world price is going up, and guess what's going to happen there? So I'd say that yes, our prices are at risk right now.
Now, some producers are considering planting sorghum instead of corn. What kind of guidance do you have there?
Well, I think they've got to look at the price of each right now and the productivity of their lands. You've got corn at $3.96. You got sorghum at $3.86. You got to look at what's the cost of production. You got to put a sharp pencil to it, and you got to look at your management abilities, your ability to produce sorghum versus your ability with your land, labor, capital, and management to produce corn.
Okay, Kim, thanks a lot. And now we have a word from our Extension Ag Policy Specialist, Amy Hagerman, for the latest on tariff programs and federal disaster programs.
Last week, in light of the stalled trade talks with China, President Trump instructed Secretary Perdue to put together a 2019 Market Facilitation Program. So now we're just waiting on payment rates and more details to emerge, but it is going to be a little bit different from the 2018 payment. The first difference is that the 2018 program was based on individual crops. This time, all their planted acres of the covered crops, and there are more this time, are going to be combined into a single amount of planted acres that will then be multiplied by a county-specific single rate. Just like the 2018 MFP program, it's going to be a one-page, very simple application process, but you do have to make sure that all of your paperwork is in place prior to getting it. But definitely take advantage of this program and the offsetting the effects that this has had on markets. Some really challenging times, not just because of what's happening in trade, but what Mother Nature is throwing at us. And there are other USDA programs, specifically some of the Farm Bill related programs, that producers can take advantage of to help them in that recovery effort for their individual farms. The first for our livestock producers is the Livestock Indemnity Program. This is a program that's really designed to cover deaths of livestock resulting from natural disasters like flooding and tornadoes. The NRCS also has some programs to help take on some of the damage to the land and also fence lines as a result of the flooding. Finally, FSA also has loan programs that can help in the rebuilding process. If you lose a building, something that you need to replace a major piece of equipment that was flooded or damaged, then talk to your FSA agent about those emergency loan programs. And then finally, just make sure you're staying on top of your crop insurance, and especially if you did sign up for the non-insured disaster insurance, make sure that you take advantage of that as well. So of course, Oklahoma State has our online resources associated with some of the different programs and some things that you can do. So definitely talk to your extension agent about the resources that are available through Oklahoma State.
With the wet spring that we've had, in many cases, farmers and ranchers are going to want to put up some of the wheat hay that perhaps won't make it to a grain crop, or some of the cool grasses such as fescue, in order to have feed for the cows next winter. As we're putting those hays up, I think we want to really be careful about the moisture content in those hay crops or in the meadows that we're cutting. Once we get it dry enough in those fields and in the meadows to where we can get equipment in there, I think we also want to consider the moisture content of the hay before we put it in a bale. If at all possible, we'd like to have it completely cured before we go ahead and bale it. At this time of the year with these frequent showers, that's often very difficult. But putting hay in a bale when it's a high moisture, has a high moisture content, can certainly be very, very dangerous. If you look at this particular chart, it gives us an indication of the percent moisture and how it impacts the hay in the bale. If it's less than 10% moisture, then it's actually pretty dry and pretty crusty, certainly not a danger in terms of potential fire. We'd like the hay to be in the 10 to 15% range. That way that we may get a little bit of temperature rise on the high end of that moisture content, but for the most part, that's ideal in terms of putting it in the hay bale and storing it. Once we get past 15, then we have the possibility of that hay beginning to mold as it's stored later on. But if it stays less than 20%, that's about all that we can expect to happen. Once we get over 20% moisture as it's going into that hay bale, now fire becomes a real possibility. As we get above 25% moisture, if the hay is going into the bale at that kind of moisture level, then quite frankly, we're going to have certainly some heat damage to the hay itself, and the possibility of fire becomes a real high risk. What happens is as this high moisture hay is being put into a bale, two different reactions take place. First of all, just a biochemical reaction of the hay itself with the moisture that's pretty normal and is going to occur in hay that's say 15% or less, and it may warm the hay to as high as 110 degrees, but if it gets no hotter than that, it's no problem. Once we get into those higher moisture ranges, and then a metabolic change takes place due to the microorganisms that are going to be stored in any hay. And with the higher moisture contents, and these microorganisms get very, very active, that metabolic activity takes over, and the temperature increase becomes rather sharp rather quickly. If it gets above 150 degrees inside that bale, then other metabolic activity, other biochemical changes take place, and that temperature change can go from 150 to 400 in a very short period of time. Of course, at that stage, it's burning the hay, probably going to burst into flames and cause a real disaster on not only our hay, but anything that might be close around it. Therefore, I'd suggest that if we're concerned at all about the moisture content of the hay that we put up, number one, don't store it next to other good hay that we know is safe and something that we're going to need, or certainly not store it close to any buildings to where if it does catch on fire, it would also burn down something that's even more valuable. We can also purchase a hay moisture tester. And those things will range in price from about $50 to as high as about $400, depending upon how often you would use it and how easily read you want it to be. But there's a lot of different ones that are on the market, and they can help you understand the moisture content before you put it in the bale. Once you get it in the bale, then you may want to consider a temperature probe to check it every so often to make sure that it's staying in one of these ranges below 120 degrees to where it's most likely going to store safely. Again, these things are commercially available, or you can make a homemade probe that you put just a small cheap thermometer down into through the probe to check the temperature inside the bale. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about hay storage and preventing fires in possibly wet hay, go to the SUNUP website. We've put several links there to important pieces of information about preventing hay loss due to fires. Go to the SUNUP website, sunup.okstate.edu, and that'll give you even more information about preventing fires and how to store potentially wet hay. We hope this helps you as you go through this haying season, and we certainly look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
When we think of working cattle, chutes and bawling calves may come to mind, and that's what some people would call the new way. But just head to the Stuart Ranch in Jefferson County and you'll see that they're still working calves the same way they did all the way back in 1868.
This is the spring branding, which means they're giving they're processing the calves today. So, you know, the animal health steps that they take to make sure these cattle remain healthy and prepare them for the next stage of their life. So basically what that means is they're going to get vaccinated. The male calves are going to get castrated and implanted, and then all the calves will be identified with the ranch's brand.
The Stuart Ranch is located on the old Chisholm Trail, where cattle drives that originated in South Texas and driven to railheads in Kansas, and those cattle came through Indian Territory right here at this point. So I think it's significant that here on the Stuart Ranch, what we saw earlier, the way that they were working cattle at kind of an old historic traditional way by horseback is significant and certainly reminds us or gives us a bigger perspective of our rich traditions and heritage here.
So this is the kind of the historical branding method. It has evolved considerably with the products that we use and maybe to some extent the process. But as far as the animal husbandry aspects, folks want their animals to be as little stressed as possible. They're going to do everything they can to make this happen quickly and to keep the animals quiet and as low stress as possible.
From the time the loop was around the calf's legs till the time that he was released from branding and processing was about 30 seconds, so it's a real short duration.
This way of doing it's going to require more people, and they could probably do up to pretty easily up to 300, maybe even 400 head in a day. This is going to occur pretty fast when you've got 2 people on horseback.
Again, it pays homage to the cowboy life and the historical way of doing things, which is important to our heritage, particularly here in the Southern Plains in Oklahoma in the beef cattle industry business.
Dave, the Stuart Ranch has a long history in the cattle industry.
They do. They won some national awards, and it's just a well-managed operation. Their people know what they're doing. They're following beef quality assurance principles, and it's just a well-oiled machine.
Well, speaking of good management practices, you and the team are inviting everybody out to the upcoming ranch tour?
Yes, ma'am. That's June 5th and 6th, and we'll be visiting a variety of operations. For example, we've got a registered Red Angus operation we'll be seeing, a well-managed Black Angus registered operation, a very, very interesting large commercial cow-calf operation we'll go see. We'll also go see the salt plant in that part of the state. We're going to go visit a well-managed stocker operation, and a special treat will be a stocker producer question and answer session among a group of 3 or 4 very, very knowledgeable, progressive stocker producers. And I've sat through one of those before, similar type format, and it was just a fascinating experience. So I look forward to our tour participants getting to do that as well.
Okay, thanks for telling us about it.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll see you again soon. That'll do it for us this week. A reminder that we have resources for you and your family from OSU Extension on flooding and storm damage available anytime at sunup.okstate.edu. I'm Lyndall Stout. We'll see you next time.